The ocean does not keep secrets. It swallows them. December 4th, 1872, the Mid-Atlantic. The British brig Dei Gratia is fighting the chop. Captain David Morehouse is on deck. He's a veteran. He knows the rhythm of the sea. But today, the rhythm is wrong. A speck on the horizon. 5 miles off the port bow. It's another ship. But she's not sailing. She's drifting. The sails are torn. The rigging is loose. She is yawing, swinging wildly with the waves, like a drunkard stumbling home. Morehouse signals. Who are you? No answer. Do you require assistance? Silence. Morehouse knows this ship. He knows the captain, Benjamin Briggs. A good man, a careful man. Briggs would never let his ship drift like this. Not with his wife and daughter on board. Something is terribly wrong. Morehouse orders a boarding party. 3 men. They lower a small boat and row across the gray gap. They climb the side. They step onto the deck, and that is when the silence hits them. It isn't the silence of an empty room. It is the silence of a grave. The wheel is unmanned, spinning loosely. The sails are flapping, useless. There is no one on watch. They go below deck, into the captain's cabin. This is where the nightmare begins. Not because of what they see, but because of what they don't see. There is no blood. There is no sign of a fight. There is no damage. The table is set. Breakfast. Plates are laid out, cups of tea, still full. A child's toy is on the floor. It looks like they just stood up and vanished. In the galley, a pot of chicken and potatoes is on the stove. In the cabin, the captain's logbook lies open on the desk. The final entry is dated 10 days ago. 10 days. For 10 days, this ship has been sailing itself. Through storms. Through night. Through the empty ocean. The men search the hold. The cargo is there. They search the crew's quarters. Their boots are still by their bunks. Their pipes are still filled with tobacco. A sailor never leaves his pipe. Not if he plans on living. The lifeboat is gone. But why? The ship is seaworthy. There are no leaks. There is food for 6 months. Why would 10 experienced sailors, a mother and a baby, jump into a tiny boat in the middle of the Atlantic, leaving a perfectly safe ship behind? They didn't flee a storm. They didn't flee pirates. They didn't flee a fire. They fled nothing. The Mary Celeste was not destroyed. She was abandoned. And the question isn't where they went. The question is, what made them run? Sailors are superstitious people. They believe a ship has a soul, a personality. Some ships are lucky. They dodge storms. They make their owners rich. And some ships are born bad. The Mary Celeste was born bad. She wasn't always called the Mary Celeste. When she was built in Nova Scotia in 1861, she was christened the Amazon. And right from the start, she tasted death. Her very first captain, Robert McClellan, was a proud man. He stepped onto her deck for her maiden voyage, and 48 hours later, he was dead. Pneumonia. He never even saw her complete her first run. That should have been the warning. But the owners kept going. On her second voyage, she hit a fishing weir. On her third, she suffered a fire in the shipyard. While crossing the English Channel, she collided with another brig, sinking it. She was a predator, a hazard. She ran aground in Cape Breton. She was wrecked, abandoned, and left to rot on the rocks. Most men would have left her there. Let the ocean take her back. But money speaks louder than omens. She was salvaged, sold, repaired, and to wash away the bad luck, they gave her a new name. They painted over Amazon. They wrote Mary Celeste. They thought a new name would change her nature. They were wrong. You can paint over the wood. You can't paint over the curse. To tame a cursed ship, you need a saint. And Captain Benjamin Briggs was as close as you could get on the rough Atlantic. He wasn't a brawler. He wasn't a gambler. And most importantly, for the mystery that was to come, he wasn't a drinker. Briggs was a man of the Bible. He was a strict disciplinarian who read scripture on the quarterdeck and forbade swearing in the mess hall. He was a master mariner. He had spent his life staring down waves that could swallow a house. He knew the ocean's temper. He respected it. He did not fear it. But this voyage was different. This wasn't just a cargo run. It was a life. He brought his wife, Sarah. She was the softening agent to his iron will. She loved the sea almost as much as he did. And he brought Sophia, 2 years old, a toddler. Imagine that image for a moment. A wooden crib lashed to the floorboards of a rolling ship. A mother singing lullabies against the roar of the wind. A baby learning to walk on a deck that never stood still. They left one child behind. Their 7-year-old son, Arthur. He stayed in Massachusetts for school with his grandmother. Briggs promised him they'd be back by spring. He promised to bring him a souvenir from Italy, a piece of the old world. On the docks of New York, Captain Briggs looked at his wife, his baby, and his sturdy command, and he saw a bright future. He didn't know he was sailing them all into a tomb. When a ship is found empty, the first finger usually points at a crew. History is full of stories about wharf rats. Men scraped from the bottom of the barrel in dirty taverns. Men who would cut a captain's throat for a bottle of rum or a bag of coins. Mutinous, drunk, unreliable. That is the easy answer. But on the Mary Celeste, it is the wrong answer. Captain Briggs didn't hire scum. He hired professionals. There were 7 crewmen, 4 Germans, 1 Dane, 2 Americans. They were hand-picked. They had clean records. They had families waiting for them back in Europe. The first mate, Albert Richardson, wasn't a stranger. He was practically family. He had sailed with Captain Briggs before. Briggs trusted Richardson enough to bring his own wife and daughter on board. You don't do that if you think your second in command is unstable. The second mate, Andrew Gilling, was 25. Young, but sharp. A rising star. The steward and the seaman were solid. Experienced. They knew the Atlantic. They knew the work. These weren't men who saw ghosts in the fog. They weren't men who would jump overboard because of a superstition. And they certainly weren't men who would abandon their captain over a petty squabble. They were an elite unit, a machine made of muscle and discipline. And that is what makes this so terrifying. If this had been a crew of drunks, we could understand a mistake. We could understand panic. But a crew like this, a crew of veterans, they don't abandon a seaworthy ship. They don't leave hot food on the table. They don't run. Unless they are facing something that discipline cannot solve. Unless they are facing something that no sailor has ever seen before. Treasure ships are easy to understand. Men kill for gold. Men kill for silver. Pirates will board a vessel for silk and spices. But the Mary Celeste wasn't carrying treasure. At least, not the kind you can spend. She was sitting on top of a bomb. Her hold was packed tight with 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol. Not the kind you drink. This was industrial strength. The kind you use to fortify Italian wines or fuel machinery. It was raw. It was volatile. It was essentially liquid fire. If a single barrel leaked, if the fumes built up in the dark, hot belly of the ship, a single spark from a boot heel or a lantern could turn the Mary Celeste into a splintered memory. There is a dark irony here, sharp enough to cut bone. Captain Briggs, the man of God, the man who forbade alcohol on his ship, was now the master of 700 barrels of it. He was a teetotaler, floating on an ocean of spirits. He knew the danger. He knew that alcohol expands with heat. He knew it gave off invisible, choking fumes. He knew he had to be careful. But cargo is just business. It pays the bills. It buys the bread. So they loaded the barrels in New York. They packed them tight, red oak barrels. Porous. They didn't know it then, but they weren't just loading merchandise. They were loading the very thing that might explain why they all vanished. The cargo was worth $35,000, a fortune in 1872. But when the ship was found drifting, not a single barrel had been stolen. Whatever happened on that ship, greed had nothing to do with it. November 7th, 1872. East River, New York City. The city is a smoky, noisy beast. Steam whistles scream. Carriages clatter over cobblestones. The docks are a forest of masts, a tangled web of rigging and hope. The Mary Celeste is ready. She sits low in the water, heavy with her volatile cargo. Her sails are furled tight. Her decks are scrubbed clean. She looks proud. She looks capable. On Pier 50, Captain Briggs stands with his wife, Sarah. This is the moment of separation. The moment where the land lets go. They write a final letter to Briggs's mother, who is caring for their son, Arthur. It is a cheerful letter, full of mundane details. "We have a fine wind," Briggs writes. "We expect a speedy passage." Sarah adds a note about Sophia. "The baby is well. She is already trying to climb the railings." There is no dread in their words, no premonition, just the ordinary optimism of a family heading to work. A photographer sets up his tripod on the dock. He ducks under the black cloth. Flash. He captures the ship. He captures the crew. It is the last image of them the world will ever see. The lines are cast off. The heavy ropes splash into the harbor water. The Mary Celeste drifts away from the pier. The tugboat guides her out, past the Statue of Liberty, which is still just a foundation, unfinished, and out towards the open Atlantic. The sky turns gray. The air turns cold. New York fades into a thin line on the horizon. As they pass the Sandy Hook lighthouse, the pilot boat turns back. The pilot waves goodbye. He watches the brig catch the wind. Her sails fill with a snap. She leans into the waves. She sails east, into the gray, into the silence, and just like that, they are gone. The first few days at sea are a deception. The land vanishes. The seagulls stop following the wake. The noise of the world is replaced by the singular, rhythmic thrum of the ocean. For the first week, the Mary Celeste behaves perfectly. She cuts through the waves like a knife. Captain Briggs settles into his routine. He wakes. He checks the compass. He checks the wind. He writes in his log. Latitude. Longitude. Speed. Boring details. Beautiful details. Because boring means safe. Sarah plays the melodeon in the cabin. A small organ. Its wheezy, cheerful music drifts up through the hatch, mixing with the creak of the rigging. Little Sophia plays on the deck, tethered to the rail so the roll of the ship doesn't toss her into the deep. The crew works the watches. 4 hours on, 4 hours off. They scrub. They mend. They smoke. They trust their captain. They trust their ship. But the Atlantic in November is not a swimming pool. It is a wilderness. It is vast, cold, and utterly indifferent to human life. As they push further east, away from the shelter of the American coast, the water changes color. It goes from a coastal green to a deep, bruising blue. Then to black. The temperature drops. The breath of the crew starts to mist in the air. The horizon becomes a prison wall that moves with them, never getting closer, never falling behind. They are a tiny wooden chip floating in an abyss, and the ocean is starting to wake up. The log entries start to change. The handwriting gets a little sharper. The light winds are replaced by fresh breeze. Then heavy swell. The calm is over. The test is beginning. The Atlantic doesn't just have weather. It has moods. And in late November 1872, its mood was violent. The Mary Celeste sailed straight into the teeth of a gale. It wasn't just a storm. It was a siege. For days the sky was a bruised purple. The wind screamed at 40 knots, tearing at the rigging, demanding to be let in. Waves the size of cathedrals rose up and smashed down onto the deck. Tons of water. Cold as ice, heavy as concrete. Inside the cabin, the world was tilted. Sarah Briggs would have clutched Sophia tight, bracing herself against the bulkheads as the floor dropped out from under them over and over again. plate sliding. Lanterns swinging wildly, casting frantic shadows on the walls. The sound would have been deafening, the groaning of the timber, the shrieking of the wind. But the Mary Celeste, she took it. She was built for this. She was a Nova Scotian brig. Tough, stout. She shook off the water like a wet dog and kept climbing the next wave. Captain Briggs was on deck, lashed to the wheel, salt stinging his eyes. He fought the ocean, and he won. The logbook tells us this. There is no panic in his writing, just facts. Heavy squalls, ship laboring, taking on water. But she held. The hull didn't crack. The masts didn't snap. They survived the worst the Atlantic could throw at them. By November 24th, the storm broke. The wind died down. The sun poked through the clouds. They were alive. They were safe. They were nearing the Azores. The hard part was supposed to be over. They had beaten the storm. But they hadn't beaten the silence. November 25th, 1872. 5 a.m. The dawn is breaking over the Atlantic. A cold gray light filtering through the clouds. To the southeast, a dark shape rises from the sea. Land. The island of Santa Maria, in the Azores. It is a welcome sight, a milestone. It means they are crossing the ocean. It means they are making progress. In his cabin, Captain Briggs sits at his desk. The lamp is flickering low. The ship is steady. He dips his pen into the inkwell. He opens the slate, the rough log where daily notes are made before being transferred to the official book. He writes the date, Monday, November 25th. He notes the position. Latitude 37 degrees 01 N, longitude 25 degrees 01 W, 6 miles off the coast of Santa Maria. He notes the weather. Wind NE. He notes the state of the ship. Everything is normal. There is no distress. No mention of leaking barrels. No mention of mutinous whispers. No mention of a sick baby. Just a man doing his job, marking his place on the map. He puts the pen down. He stands up. Perhaps he goes to the galley for coffee. Perhaps he goes to check on Sarah and Sophia. Perhaps he goes up on deck to smell the land breeze. He doesn't know it, but he has just written his own epitaph. Those ink scratches on the paper are the final testament of the Mary Celeste. At 8 a.m., the crew changes watch. Everything is routine. The ship sails on. And then, the pen never touches the paper again. The record stops. The history of the Mary Celeste ends here. From this moment on, there are no facts. Only ghosts. Time is usually measured in minutes, hours, days. But on the ocean, without a logbook, time dissolves. From November 25th to December 4th, 10 days, 240 hours. This is the gap. The black hole in the story. The Mary Celeste entered this gap as a living ship, full of breath and noise and purpose. She exited it as a tomb. What happened in those 10 days? We know the ship kept moving, but she wasn't being steered. When the Dei Gracia found her, she was nearly 400 miles east of her last known position. 400 miles. Drifting. Aimless. Did they abandon her immediately after that last log entry? If they did, the ship sailed alone for a week and a half. A ghost ship navigating itself through the currents. Imagine that. Empty decks under the moonlight, the wheel turning by itself, the sails filling and flapping in the wind. The table set for breakfast day after day, while the food slowly rotted. Or did they stay? Did they live on that ship for days, paralyzed by some unseen fear? Did they huddle on the deck, waiting for something? Did they watch the island of Santa Maria fade away, unable to turn the wheel? The ocean saw it. The wind heard it. But they aren't talking. All we have is the silence. A silence so deep it swallows the imagination. A silence that screams. For 10 days, the Mary Celeste was a stage with no actors. And when the curtain finally rose on December 4th, the audience found only an empty set. December 4th. The present tense of our nightmare. We are back on the deck of the Dei Gracia. Captain Morehouse has a decision to make. A hard one. He has found a prize. A ship worth a fortune. A cargo worth even more. By maritime law, if he can bring her into port, he claims the salvage rights. It's a payday that could set him up for life. But to claim it, he has to split his crew. He has 7 men. He needs to put 3 of them on the Mary Celeste. That leaves 4 men to sail his own ship. And 3 men to sail a broken, haunted stranger. It is a dangerous gamble. If a storm hits, both skeleton crews could die. If the Mary Celeste is leaking, his men could sink with her. But greed, or perhaps duty, wins. He points to his first mate, Oliver DeVoe. Take her to Gibraltar. DeVoe nods. He takes 2 men. They grab their sea bags. They grab their tools. They step from the living ship to the dead one. DeVoe stands at the wheel of the Mary Celeste. It feels wrong in his hands. Cold. The ship feels heavy. Sluggish. Like dragging a corpse. They pump the bilge. They fix the sails. They try to ignore the empty cabin. They try to ignore the child's toy still lying on the floor. They try to ignore the feeling that they are being watched. For days, the 2 ships sail together. A funeral procession of 2 Ds. The Dei Gratia leading, the Mary Celeste following, like a reluctant ghost. They sail through the nights. DeVoe sleeps in the captain's cabin. In Briggs' bed. Does he dream? Does he hear the phantom cries of a baby? Does he smell the phantom smoke of a pipe? He is a practical man. He focuses on the compass. But the sea is vast, and the silence of this ship is louder than the wind. Every creak sounds like a footstep. Every shadow looks like a man. They are sailing a mystery into port, and the world is waiting to tear it apart. Gibraltar, the rock. The gateway to the Mediterranean, a British fortress of stone and bureaucracy. When the Mary Celeste limps into the harbor, she isn't greeted with applause. She is greeted with suspicion. Enter Frederick Solly Flood, the Attorney General of Gibraltar. A man with a magnificent name, a magnificent moustache, and a very suspicious mind. Solly Flood doesn't believe in ghosts. And he doesn't believe in accidents. He looks at the Mary Celeste, and he sees a crime scene. He sees a ship that is perfectly seaworthy. He sees a valuable cargo untouched. He sees a missing crew. To him, this math only adds up to one thing: murder. He launches an inquiry, a grand inquisition. He drags the crew of the Dei Gratia into court. He treats them not as heroes, but as suspects. Why did you find her? He asks. How did you know she was empty? Where is the logbook? He is convinced that something dark happened on those decks. He hires divers to check the hull for damage. Maybe she was rammed. He brings in experts to examine the wood for blood. He analyzes the sword found in the captain's cabin. He wants a villain. He wants to hang someone. The salvage hearing becomes a witch hunt. Captain Morehouse is grilled for hours. DeVoe is interrogated until he is dizzy. Solly Flood spins a narrative. Maybe the crew of the Dei Gratia killed the crew of the Mary Celeste at sea. Maybe they conspired together for the insurance money. Maybe there was a mutiny, and the Dei Gratia helped the mutineers escape. He weaves a web of conspiracy. The newspapers love it. The world loves it. The ghost ship becomes a sensation. But Solly Flood has a problem. He has theories. He has suspicion. But he has no bodies. He has no weapon. He has no proof. He is fighting a phantom. And phantoms don't testify in court. The first theory is the oldest story in the book. The crew turns. The captain dies. The ship is taken. Mutiny. Solly Flood loved this theory. He looked at the stains on the deck, reddish-brown spots near the rail. He looked at the sword found in Briggs's cabin. It looked discolored. The narrative writes itself. The crew gets into the alcohol. They get drunk. They get violent. Captain Briggs tries to stop them. He is overpowered. He is murdered. His wife and child are disposed of. The officers are killed. The crew, sobering up and realizing what they've done, panic. They launch the lifeboat and flee, hoping to disappear into the ports of the Azores or North Africa. They leave the ship to drift, hoping it sinks and takes the evidence with it. It fits the drunken sailor stereotype. It explains the missing people. It explains the hasty departure. But there is a hole in the hull of this theory. A big one. First, the crew. Remember who they were. Experienced men. Fathers. Hand-picked. And the alcohol? It was denatured. Poisonous. Drinking it wouldn't make you drunk. It would make you blind or dead. There were no empty barrels. No sign of a party. And then the science came in. Solly Flood sent the wood chips from the deck to a chemist in London. He sent the sword to be analyzed. The results came back. The blood on the deck. Rust. The blood on the sword. Not blood. Citrate. Lemon juice. There was no massacre. There were no bullet holes, no axe marks, no signs of a struggle. The cabin was tidy. The toys were put away. If this was a mutiny, it was the most polite, orderly mutiny in maritime history. The theory doesn't hold water. The crew didn't kill their captain. So who or what did? If the danger didn't come from within, perhaps it came from without. Pirates. The Atlantic in 1872 wasn't the Caribbean of the 1700s. Blackbeard was long dead. But the Riff Pirates of North Africa were still a threat. They operated near the Strait of Gibraltar, raiding ships that strayed too close to the coast. The theory goes like this. The Mary Celeste is becalmed. A sleek, fast pirate vessel slips out of the fog. Men swarm the rails, knives in teeth. They round up the crew. They force them onto the pirate ship to be sold into slavery. They leave the Mary Celeste adrift. It's terrifying. It's dramatic. It solves the mystery of the missing bodies. But look closer. Pirates are thieves. That is their job description. They steal. The Mary Celeste was carrying a fortune. The alcohol. The food. The ship's instruments. The sailors' personal belongings. Captain Briggs' gold watch. Still in the cabin. The crew's money. Still in their sea chests. The cargo. Untouched. What kind of pirate boards a ship, kidnaps the crew, and leaves $35,000 worth of loot behind? A pirate who hates money and the location. The Mary Celeste was found near the Azores, nowhere near the hunting grounds of the Riff Pirates. It would be like finding a carjacking victim in the middle of the ocean. There was no sign of a boarding, no damage to the hull, no grappling hooks. The Mary Celeste wasn't attacked. She was ignored. The pirate theory sinks faster than the mutiny theory. There were no monsters climbing over the rail. Whatever happened alone. When violence fails to explain a mystery, we turn to the second great motivator of human sin. Money. Was it a scam? A secret plot? The skeptics looked at Captain Briggs and Captain Morehouse of the Dei Gratia. They were friends. They had dined together in New York the night before sailing. Some say they made a pact over a glass of wine. The theory, Briggs would sabotage his own ship. Or perhaps just abandon it. Morehouse would miraculously find it. They would claim the salvage money, the insurance money. They would split the pot and retire rich. Briggs would disappear with his family to start a new life under a new name. It sounds like a Hollywood thriller. The Sting on the high seas. But let's look at the ledger. The Mary Celeste was insured, yes, but for a modest amount. The cargo was insured. But if the ship isn't lost, the owner doesn't get paid. Salvage rights are tricky. You have to fight for them in court, as Morehouse found out. And the risk? Captain Briggs was a part owner of the Mary Celeste. He had his own money tied up in her. Why would he throw away his career, his reputation, and his ship for a gamble that might not pay off? And why bring his wife and baby? Why put a 2-year-old in an open boat in the middle of the Atlantic in November? That isn't fraud. That is child endangerment. That is madness. Captain Morehouse was a respected man. When he found the ship, he didn't hide it. He sailed it straight to the authorities. He risked his own ship and crew to bring her in. And what did he get? Solly Flood dragged his name through the mud. The court awarded him a fraction of the salvage value because they were so suspicious. He didn't get rich. He got investigated. There is no evidence of a payoff. No evidence of a meeting. Just two captains who knew each other, crossing paths in a tragedy. Sometimes a coincidence is just a coincidence. And sometimes a friend is the one who finds your grave. In every mystery, there is a red herring. A clue that shines so bright, it blinds you to the truth. In the case of the Mary Celeste, it was the sword. When the investigators searched the cabin, they found it under the captain's bed. A sheathed sword. It belonged to Captain Briggs. A relic. A souvenir. But when they drew it from the sheath, they saw it. Stains. Dark, rusty, smeared stains on the blade. Solly Flood's eyes lit up. Here it was. The murder weapon. The narrative practically screamed at him. Briggs, cornered in his cabin, grabbing his sword to defend his family. The blade piercing flesh. The blood drying on the steel. The press went wild. The bloody sword of the Mary Celeste. It was the smoking gun. But science is a cruel mistress to sensation. They sent the sword to a laboratory. A primitive forensic test, but effective. They scraped the stains. They tested for iron. They tested for blood corpuscles. The result? Citrate, acid, lemon juice. It wasn't a weapon of war. It was a kitchen tool. Someone, maybe Briggs, maybe the steward, had used the sword to slice lemons. Probably for tea. Or maybe to prevent scurvy. They hadn't wiped it clean. They put it back in the sheath. The acid ate at the steel. It left a stain that looked like dried blood. The murder weapon was nothing more than a dirty dish. It is almost funny. Almost. Because while the lawyers were arguing over lemon juice, the real answer was drifting further away. The sword didn't kill anyone. The ocean did. So, if it wasn't murder, and it wasn't pirates, and it wasn't a scam, why did they run? We have to look at the cargo again. The 1,700 barrels of liquid fire. In the 21st century, a scientist named Dr. Andrea Sella decided to test a theory. He built a replica of the Mary Celeste's hold. He filled it with alcohol fumes. He created a spark. It is called a pressure wave explosion. It doesn't shatter wood. It doesn't scorch the walls. It is a flash. A boom. A blast of hot air that blows the hatches open, and then vanishes. Imagine the scene. The Mary Celeste has been sailing through storms. The barrels are jostling. Some of the red oak staves are porous. Alcohol leaks out. The hold fills with fumes. Invisible, odorless in the cold. The temperature rises as they approach the Azores. The liquid expands. The fumes get thicker. Then, a spark. Maybe from the friction of the barrels rubbing together. Maybe a pipe. Or maybe They just opened the hatch to ventilate the hold. Whoosh! A blast of flame shoots up from the hold. The hatch covers are blown into the air. The crew is terrified. They think the ship is exploding. They think the cargo is about to detonate. Briggs shouts, "Abandon ship." He thinks they have seconds to live. He doesn't grab the logbook. He doesn't grab his coat. He grabs his wife. He grabs his child. They scramble into the lifeboat. They launch it. They push away from the hull, paddling frantically, waiting for the massive explosion that will shatter the sky. But the explosion never comes. The flash burns out in a second. The fire starves itself of oxygen. The ship is fine, but they are already in the boat. And the Mary Celeste, with her sails set, is catching the wind. She starts to pull away, and the gap between the lifeboat and the ship begins to widen. There is another clue. A quiet one. Lying on the deck, near the pumps, the salvage crew found a sounding rod. It's a long metal rod used to measure the water in the bilge. You drop it down a pipe. You pull it up. If it's wet, you're sinking. Why was it on the deck? Why were the pumps disassembled? The Mary Celeste had been battered by storms for weeks. She was an old ship. She took on water. But something was wrong with the pumps. They were clogged or broken. Captain Briggs needed to know how much water was in the hold. But the hold was packed tight with cargo. And the cargo was alcohol. If the ship was leaking and the pumps weren't working, Briggs was blind. He couldn't see the water level. He might have thought the ship was taking on water faster than she was. He drops the sounding rod. Maybe it gives a false reading. Maybe the rough seas make it look like the water is rising fast. Maybe he thinks the ship is sinking now. Panic is a contagion. The pumps are useless. The rod says danger. The ship is groaning. He makes a calculation. Better to take our chances in the lifeboat than to ride a sinking coffin to the bottom. He is wrong. The ship isn't sinking. She has just a few feet of water in the bilge. Normal for a wooden ship in a storm. But he doesn't know that. He trusts the rod. He trusts his fear. He orders the evacuation. And the sounding rod is left lying on the deck. A silent witness to a fatal mistake. A tool that was supposed to save them, but instead convinced them to jump. We are now in the final minute, the crescendo of the tragedy. It is likely a combination of everything. The storms have rattled their nerves. The pump is broken. The sounding rod gives a bad reading. And then, maybe a burp from the cargo. A rumble. A smell of fumes. Panic strikes like lightning. There is no time to pack. No time to finish breakfast. No time to write a log entry. Briggs shouts the order. All hands to the boat! They lowered the yawl, a small, open boat, off the stern. It bobs wildly in the waves. Sarah passes the baby down to a sailor. Briggs grabs the chronometer and the sextant, the only tools he needs to navigate. They pile in. 10 people, crammed shoulder to shoulder. The boat sits low in the water, but Briggs is smart. He is careful. He doesn't just cut the line. He orders a tow line. A painter. A long rope connecting the lifeboat to the Mary Celeste. The plan is simple. Stay in the lifeboat. Trail behind the ship. See if she explodes. See if she sinks. If she doesn't, they can pull themselves back on board. It is a safety measure. A lifeline. They drift behind the ship, bouncing in her wake. They watch her. She looks solid. She looks fine. The panic starts to fade. The adrenaline wears off. They realize she isn't sinking. Pull us back in, Briggs yells. Haul on the line. But the Atlantic has one last trick to play. The rope old, wet, strained by the weight of the boat and the drag of the ocean. It snaps. The connection is broken. The Mary Celeste, free of the drag, catches a gust of wind. She speeds up. The lifeboat, heavy and low, slows down. Briggs screams. The men row. They row until their lungs burn. But a rowboat cannot catch a brig under sail. They watch her get smaller, and smaller, and smaller, until she is just a white speck on the gray horizon. And then she is gone. The yawl, 20 feet long, 5 feet wide, a wooden shell no bigger than a parking space. Inside this shell, 10 people, 7 strong men, a terrified mother, a crying baby, and a captain who knows he has just killed them all. The silence returns, but this time it is not the silence of a mystery. It is the silence of a death sentence. The Mary Celeste is gone. The white sail has vanished over the curve of the earth. They are alone. The boat is overloaded. It sits dangerously low in the water. Every wave that laps over the gunwale brings cold, salty water around their ankles. They have to bail constantly. If they stop, they sink. They have no compass. The one Briggs grabbed is useless in a bouncing boat. They have no food. The breakfast is still on the table, miles away. They have no water. They have no shelter. Sarah Briggs hugs Sophia. She tries to keep the baby warm. But the Atlantic wind is a knife. It cuts through wool. It cuts through skin. Hypothermia doesn't wait. It starts now. The men look at Briggs. The discipline is still there, but it is brittle. They are elite sailors. They know exactly what this means. They know the odds. They are hundreds of miles from land. They are drifting in the currents. They are waiting for a miracle that isn't coming. The sun begins to set. The gray sky turns to black. And the ocean gets louder. Night on the open ocean is not like night on land. It is absolute. There are no streetlights, no distant glow of a city, just a crushing, suffocating darkness. The stars, if they appear, are cold and distant. They offer no warmth. The only sound is the slapping of water against wood and the chattering of teeth. The first night is bad. The fear keeps them awake, but the days that follow are worse. Thirst begins. The human body can survive weeks without food, but without water. In the salt spray, 3 days, maybe 4. The tongue swells. The lips crack. The mind starts to unravel. Hallucinations begin. They see ships that aren't there. They hear voices in the wind. They dream of the teacups sitting on the table of the Mary Celeste. The boat drifts. Maybe they row. But to where? The Azores are a needle in a haystack. If they miss the islands, the next stop is Africa or oblivion. The social order breaks down. Not mutiny, just exhaustion. The men stop rowing. They slump over the oars. Sarah stops singing. Sophia stops crying. The cold eats them from the outside. The thirst eats them from the inside. Did they hold hands? Did they pray? Or did they just stare into the horizon, waiting for the end? We don't know how long they lasted. A week, 2. Long enough to regret the mistake. Long enough to watch the hope die in each other's eyes. The Atlantic is a vast graveyard without headstones, and somewhere out there, under the rolling waves, their story ends. The ocean is efficient. It cleans up after itself. No bodies were ever found. Not a scrap of clothing. Not a piece of the lifeboat. Not a message in a bottle. 10 people vanished without a trace. This is rare. Usually, wreckage washes up. A nameplate. A boot. But for the crew of the Mary Celeste, nothing. What happened to them? Perhaps a wave capsized the overloaded boat in the middle of the night. It would have been quick. The shock of the cold water, the weight of their heavy wool coats, dragging them down. Perhaps they slowly succumbed to exposure, falling asleep one by one, slipping into the final hypothermic coma, and then slipping silently over the side. Or perhaps they washed up on a desolate stretch of the African coast, only to perish in the desert. There were rumors, of course. Years later, men would claim to be survivors. I was the cook. I was the cabin boy. They were all frauds. Looking for attention. Looking for money. Their stories never matched the facts. The truth is colder. The truth is that Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, baby Sophia, and 7 brave sailors dissolved into the elements. They became part of the salt, parts of the current. They joined the millions of others who have been claimed by the sea. But unlike the others, they left a ghost behind. They left a ship that refused to die. A ship that would sail on, carrying their mystery forever. The Mary Celeste survived. But she was never the same. She was marked. She was the ghost ship. Nobody wanted to sail her. Sailors would walk off the job when they saw her name on the roster. "That's the ship that eats people," they'd whisper. Her owners couldn't make a profit. She was sold, and sold again, and sold again. 17 times in 13 years, and every owner suffered. One went bankrupt. One died suddenly. One ended up in prison. The curse of the Amazon had returned with a vengeance. She was a financial black hole, a pariah of the ports. She sailed the world, Boston, Africa, the Indian Ocean, but she always sailed under a cloud. She was a celebrity, but the kind you stare at, not the kind you invite home. Newspapers followed her movements. The cursed vessel returns. She became a legend while she was still afloat. Arthur Conan Doyle, before he wrote Sherlock Holmes, wrote a story about her. He changed the name to the Mary Celeste and added gruesome details about hot tea and half-eaten breakfasts. The public ate it up. The fiction became the fact. But the real ship, the wood and canvas reality, she was just a tired, unlucky brig, dragging her bad reputation across the 7 seas. She was rotting. She was unwanted. She was waiting to die. 1885. 13 years after the mystery. The Mary Celeste is old. She is tired. Her latest owner is a man named Gilman Parker. He is not a sailor. He is a swindler. He knows he can't make money sailing the ship. So he decides to make money killing her. He loads her up with a cargo of cheap boots and cat food. He insures the cargo for $30,000, claiming it is valuable merchandise. He hires a captain who is in on the scheme. They sail her to Haiti, to the Rochelle Bank, a jagged coral reef. On a clear day, in calm waters, the captain steers her straight at the rocks. Crunch! She hits hard. Her spine snaps. Her bottom is torn out. She stuck fast. The crew rows ashore. They claim it was an accident. They file the insurance claim. But even in death, the Mary Celeste refuses to go quietly. The insurance investigator is suspicious. He dives on the wreck. He finds the valuable cargo. He finds crates of trash. Parker is arrested. The captain is charged. The fraud is exposed. Parker dies shortly after, ruined and disgraced. The captain dies within 3 months. The curse claimed its final victims. The Mary Celeste is left on the reef. The waves batter her. The sun bleaches her ribs. Slowly, piece by piece, she falls apart. She slips into the water and disappears. No museum, no monument, just a pile of wood on a coral reef in the Caribbean. A fitting end for a ship that never really belonged to the world of the living. We want monsters. We want mutiny. We want aliens, or sea monsters, or ghosts. Because those things are scary. But they make sense. They are stories. But the truth of the Mary Celeste is more terrifying than any ghost story. Because the truth is simply a mistake. A wrong calculation. A moment of panic. A broken rope. That is all it took to erase 10 lives. The breakfast on the table. The tea in the cups. The toy on the floor. These aren't clues to a crime. They are monuments to an interruption. They are the things we leave behind when we think we are coming back. But they never came back. Captain Briggs never gave his son Arthur that souvenir from Italy. Arthur waited and waited. He grew up without a father, without a mother, without his baby sister. He spent his life defending his father's name against the rumors of drunkenness and suicide. He was the one left sitting in the empty chair. The mystery of the Mary Celeste isn't about what was on the ship. It's about what was missing. the heartbeat, the breath, the life. She sails on in our collective memory. The archetypal ghost ship, drifting forever in the fog of history. Perfectly safe, perfectly sound, and perfectly alone. So the next time you look at the ocean, remember them. Don't look for the monster in the deep. Look for the empty boat drifting just out of reach.